CSV file, and so many other people have to read CSV files as well. So one of the great things is there's a library to help you read CSV files specifically.
We're not launching rockets here. Whatever it is you're trying to do, somebody else has already done it. Quite frequently, they've already created a library for you to use. Use it. Remember, got a couple of lazy programmers here. You know, be lazy. Take advantage of what's already there. Best code in the world is the code that's already written.
Absolutely, because I could write code that would take that read line output and go through, find the comma, and say get the string starting from the beginning to the first comma, and that's the animal name. And I could do all that. It's quite possible. It's called parsing.
Yeah.
And it's been done by many a programmer. But you know what? There's a module that will help you read CS files.
Yep.
Let's use it.
Exactly. And I'd even go one step further, that one of the most common mistakes that I see developers make is they look at something and they go, well, I could create code to solve that problem. You know what? You're absolutely right. You could. And you might even be thinking, and I might be able to do it a little bit better than they could. And again, maybe you could, maybe you couldn't, maybe you could. But in the long run, you've got a solution. It's ready. It's all set, ready to go. You could use it. Just go ahead and use it. It's there, and that allows you to then focus on what the real task or the real problem is at hand, rather than having to worry about the nitty-gritty of going in and doing all of this.
Yeah,
like,
so, you know, because you're not writing this program. You probably, even though your program has to read a file, the problem you're probably trying to solve just happens to require that data.
Yep.
So let's not spend more time than we have to just getting the data. Then we can focus more on looking at the data that we've got.
Could we go back in and write a bubble sort? Sure. I've got better things to do with my time. I'm just going to use sort and move on.
Exactly. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is a library. If you import CSV, you will have a library you can use in your code to help you read CSV files. And I want to show you a couple of the functions you might want to use when reading CS files from this module. So if we go to the slide, you can see you do have to import the module because this functionality is not included in your Python by default. You have to say, I want to use the functions inside this module. And once you've done that, there is a reader function. And what the reader function will do is it'll actually return all the rows that were inside the file, but it will return them, instead of one just big giant string, it actually returns them as a list. And we just learned a little earlier how we can process and work through lists. So once you've got the values in a list, and it does assume by default that you're using a comma to separate the different values in your file. But it is possible. Sometimes the data in our file might contain something like an address. And the address has a comma inside it. So sometimes a comma is not the best separator to use in a CSV file because there might be commas within the data. So sometimes people might use a slash, or they might use a semicolon. It's fairly common. But the idea is you can't be sure that every single CSV file actually uses a comma to separate between different values.
Yep.
So if you look at the syntax on the slide, you'll see that the reader function, you can call it a couple of ways. You can either call it by passing in the name, just the name of the file. That will assume you're using a comma to distinguish between the different values in a row. Or you can specify, by the way, the delimiter I'm using in this file is, and in this case, I'm specifying a comma, but it could be a semicolon, a colon, a slash.
The number of times that I open up a file and it's got a CSV extension and it's using semicolons.
Yes, and you read the data and you're going, why is it all messed up?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not that unusual. A lot of times it's because of address information. A lot of times addresses contain commas.
Yep.
Yeah, so it comes up fairly often. So now what we can do is, so we specify our file name, we specify our access mode, we open the file name with the access mode. That's nothing new there, right? I could talk about the new code in a second. But so we specify our file name, our access mode, we say open our file with the access mode read, and then we're using the CSV function, reader, to read that file and take the contents, and that's going to return a list, which is going to end up in a list variable called data from file. Now, I have kind of cheated a little bit here and snuck in some new syntax that you guys haven't seen before. And that is right here, this word with, and the with as my CSV file. We haven't seen this syntax before. Suddenly this is like, I'm not actually executing a loop here, but it looks a little bit like a loop.
It does, and again, I noticed the colon and the tab.
Yeah, and it's indented here as well.
Yep.
What this is doing is, last module, Christopher, you were talking about how sometimes you can get an error when you try to open a file and it's already in use.
Yep.
So we were talking about sometimes it was important to close your file because otherwise, much like, if you open up a Word file and someone else tries to open the same Word file at the same time, it'll go,
Yep.
oh, you can't open it, it's already in use. And sometimes when we're writing code, we write code that opens a file and then an error occurs so it doesn't get closed. So then the next time you try and run the program, it gets confused. When it tries to open the file, you get an error message because it's saying, no, it's still open from last time. I can't open it again. And as a programmer, you get really frustrated trying to figure out, how do I release that lock and get it to work again?
Right.
When you use this method, when you use this syntax, I should say, to open a file, what this does is it's basically designed to help protect you. When you say with open file as and give your file a name this way, instead of saying my CSV file instead of saying my CSV file equals open file name access mode, instead I'm saying with open file as, so this is the file name here, my CSV file, you can call it anything you like. When you do it this way, this syntax ensures if there is an error during the processing, the file will always be closed. So if an error happens during the open or somewhere in your processing, if an error happens anywhere in the indented code as you're processing through the data, the file will always be closed.
And even if there wasn't an error, it would still close it for you.
Yes, it does the close for you. So
Okay.
this way, I don't have to remember to close the file. I don't have to add the error handling, say, if there's an error on open, please make sure the file still got closed. Comes back to, I get to be a lazy programmer by adding the words with and as.
Yep.
I save myself having to worry about file close.
Yep.
It's efficient. It's also protecting yourself.
Absolutely, and actually, I would even go just kind of one slight step sideways. But just to mention, because I know we have a lot of developers who do other languages, that for those of you who've done .NET, this is analogous to that using statement where it will automatically clean up whatever the variable was, so like files and database connections. So that's exactly what with as is doing for us.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a useful syntax. It's one I would recommend. It's a little more confusing. That's why we didn't want to introduce in the very first module on files.
Yep.
But I would actually recommend you get used to using the with open as file name instead of file name equals open, because you're less likely to have problems executing your code. So that's just the syntax there.
So I'm just laughing because again we've got that little bit of a delay. So I just said about the with and
Just
as,
like you're using?
and sure enough, there in the QA is whether or not the with is just like using.
Bingo. All right. So well spotted by someone out there in the audience.
Exactly.
Good job. All right, so we were just talking about the with and the and. Okay, now once we have all the rows from a CSV file return, remember I said when we use the reader function inside the CSV method, so we're calling reader, we give it the name of the file, and it returns a list that contains all the rows, so it'll be a list of all the rows into this variable data from file. So that's going to be a list.
And what's nice about that is anybody who's tried to parse through a file line by line by line manually,
it's nasty.
It knows how much of a problem that can wind up being. Now, granted, yes, loading everything up into a list isn't necessarily the best use of memory. So be careful about doing something like that. I'm not going to try to grab a 30 meg file and just load that into memory. But if I know that the file is maybe only about 20 lines, 30 lines long,
even 100 lines or 1,000 lines. You can handle 1,000 lines.
Throw it into a list, be done with it, because it will make your life that much easier when you're trying to program it. So, unless you're working with megs and megs and megs of data, don't worry about loading up some data into a list and reading that all from a file. Don't worry about it at all.
Because we saw an entire module of all the cool features and functions we can do when we work with a list.
You could do a for, you can,
We had that cool for loop for looping through a list. We had that index function but would allow us to search a list. So effectively, that suddenly means I can search a file.
Exactly.
Load the file into a list, search for list. Boom, you just search the file to see if a value's in there. We had the ability to update the list, add to the list, delete from the list. So suddenly you're getting all these capabilities and all this functionality really easily to do all of that information or all those functions on the data from a file. So
exactly. Yep.
at least they're so nice to work with. That's a great way to go. Now, if you do have all the values into a list and you want to see all the values, well, what did we see as a way of looking at all the values in a list? We saw you can use a for loop. And we do that. Remember, each value in the list is going to be one row.
Okay.
I do want to be specific about that. So if we actually take a look at the file we had here, the list will actually have a value of Tasmanian devil, comma, endangered. The second value in the list will be Tasmanian emu extinct. The third value in the list will be Tasmanian tiger extinct.
Okay.
The fourth value in the list will be possum common. It is not going to be the individual values. So each row will be one list item. So I'll print that out so you can kind of see how that works. All right, so let's do that as an example because I think we need to see that in action. And this was read file line by line. I'll just take that code and we'll comment that out with my control Casey. And then this time, instead of doing, I'm going to change my to a with open Tasmania text as animal file, colon. So now I'm using my with as syntax to open the file, just a slight change there in syntax. And then I specify that and let me remind myself of the syntax because every now and then I draw a blank on these things. That's right, csv.reader, thank you. Then I need let's call it all rows. I'm going to call it all rows. I'm trying to think meaningful names. All rows list. So a list that contains all the rows from the file, and that is going to be equal to csv dot. Oh, no IntelliSense. I forgot to import the CSV module so that I have access to those awesome functions. Now, when I do csv dot, I can actually see the reader function in my IntelliSense, and I specify that I want to read the animal file that I just opened into that list.
Perfect.
Okay. Now, what I want to do is now I want to say for current row in all rows list, print current row. So let's print each of the rows right up on the screen. If we run, hopefully we should see a nice printout. Oh, I was going to say something's going to be wrong. Current row is not defined. That's because I have 3 R's in current row instead of current. Talk row. Like a pirate day was on the 17th. It's not. So let's try that again. And boom, there's all my rows printed on the screen.
Yep.
I'm just going to run through this quickly with the debugger because sometimes just seeing it all spewed out doesn't make it clear that it really is one row is one value. And that's so essential to understand because that's going to really affect how you process the data. So if I put a breakpoint here on the for loop, actually let's even do it right here when we populate the list. So now when I run, I can hold my cursor over the all rows list. And right now that doesn't have a value because the yellow arrow means that's the next line of code that will be executed. So when I hit the step into button or hit F11, it executes and that row is ready to start entering the for loop. So any variable I hover over, I can see its value. And if I expand this one, I'm going to pin this up, pin this so you can see it. And if I expand it, no, this is a little hard to see here. Let me expand that. No, that's not what I meant to do. Yeah, come on. Okay, you know what? It's not showing up nicely there. Let me do it this way. It was showing up better here when I had it. Not line number. I have to expand it here. I had it showing a second ago. That's really weird.
It was there.
I know. Something strange going on with the debugger here. So all rows list. If I go here. So it contains literally one row for each. So let me just go to the next line of code. We can see it by current row. So you can see the current value of current row. What is going on with my debugger? It's acting a little odd at the moment. Let me just try, I'm going to try something else here. Let me go down to the autos window, and no variables are showing up my autos. My locals maybe? Locals, by the way, is this window here called locals. This is a window you can use when you're in the debugger that shows you the contents of all the variables that are currently available to be viewed.
Right.
So if I go here, I can see, that animal file is currently, it says closed, which is strange. The name of the file is tasmania.txt. It's opened with read mode. If I open CSV, I can actually see the values of the CSV, but I'm just trying to, what's odd is my variables all rows list. Here it is. There's the variable all those rows list. But for some reason, I'm having trouble seeing the actual values.
Yeah, it's showing you that you have 4, but that's okay.
Yeah, so that's true. I can see it's got 4 lines.
Yeah.
And then current row, see, I'm confused because current row is not listed. It's throwing me off a little bit. Let me try executing one more line of code and seeing if that pops up. Something odd just happened there. So let's just restart that. Try that one more time. All right, so we go through, we're here, we're about to execute this line of code. I'm just going to dock this back to the bottom again. So it's kind of out of the way. Not that much, thank you. It's a little generous in terms of space. Want to be able to see the code. I'm a little more concerned with you guys seeing the code. You guys just go away. There, get away, go away. I'll bring up what I need. Okay, shrink this down so you can see the window. I want you to look at the code, that's what I care about. And the line is about to execute, about to read the contents.
Yep.
Into my variable, and then it goes into my loop, prints the current row on the screen, prints on the current screen. Now this time I think it's actually working. Now you can see the value of current row is Tasmanian emu extinct, and the next time I execute, the value of current row is Tasmanian tiger extinct, and this time let's see if it actually is. There we go. Now I can actually see that, you know, the different values, possum, common, and so on.
Yeah, it was really kind of funny that it didn't seem to read the file. That was sort of weird.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I said something wonky happened, and you know, wonky things do happen.
Yes, absolutely.
It's life. So now I have all the different values displayed on the screen, but I still have them at the row level. There are definitely times when you're going to want to be able to access an individual value from the CSV file. You don't necessarily want the entire row. You want to know the name of the animal that's in that file, because the CSV file you receive might contain 10 columns of data, and maybe you only care about the name of the animal. You don't care if it's endangered, what region it lived in, if it's a herbivore and a carnivore and all of that. So then we get an interesting challenge if you think about it, because right now, I have a list, all rows list, and that is a list, and each value is the entire row. When I process through current row, then current row is a list that contains all the entries for that row. So this starts to get really confusing, because now if I want an individual value, I have to say for current word in current row, print current word. So I basically got a list of lists that's been returned. So I have to loop through each list in the list.
Okay.
And then, as I loop through each list in the list, I can get the individual words
So what it's
from that
looking
list.
like to me is that it's basically giving you back, if you will, sort of of an object, and it's giving you the ability to go into each one. So in your particular case, and if you ran this, we would see it. I'm
going to do this as well so we can see that. That will make it a little clearer.
Yep. Yeah, so if you go ahead and run this, and so we can see the output. So it's looking to me like it's just simply grabbing each individual item. There's your trailing space after the comma.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, it's sort of a throwback to what we had earlier. And so it makes it very easy to take each row and then break down into it. So if there was a calculation that you needed to do, if there was a display that you wanted to put together, you could go ahead and do that. Now, of course, the main catch whenever you're working with CSV files is that I'm not able to access the individual items by name.
No, you can't say
it's just by location.
You can't go with. Unfortunately, there's no ability to say, "Would you please give me third row, second column?" We can't do that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you end up having to go through the whole thing and then extracting. Well, you could say, if I'm on the third time through the loop, and it's the second column, then take it out.
Exactly. But that being said, it's still a million times easier than having to parse through the CSV file itself. Ask any developer one of the things they hate doing the most,
parsing.
And that's going to be parsing strings. They're trying to figure out where the commas are, the +1, -1.
Where's the first letter of the next word? Where's the last letter of the first word?
Yeah, got better things to do with my time, so much easier just to go ahead and use the utility and let it do the work for you.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you look at it, wherever I said print current row, that was the output that's appearing inside the square brackets. And wherever I'm printing current word, then those are just, so you can see here, this is the list value that was contained inside current row. And then what I did is I then had a loop that said loop through this list, which contains Tasmanian deviled, and retrieve each of the words from within that list.
Yep, exactly.
So it's a little confusing. The more you do it, practice, practice, practice. That's how you get the hang of it. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with these nested loops. But this is one of the most common nested loop scenarios, is when we need to access the individual values inside a CSV file. So I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint for a second. And so there's my how do I retrieve the individual rows. And then and there's just an example on the slide. I did want to put a more complete example in there. And then we just did the demo. And if you want the individual values, that shows you how you can make the nested loop to show the individual values in each individual row from your CSV file using nested loops. Now, one of the things, though, that I know somebody out there, I'm surprised, I don't know if it's come up in the comment windows yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody looked at this output and said, I don't like those square brackets.
Not yet.
Oh, see, yeah. If I take this part of this out, if I comment out this code, and I just said, sure, I'll print you the contents of that file, that's ugly.
It is, and the reason that it's printing that way is because it's just showing you what's going on behind the scenes.
Because it's a list.
It's showing you the list.
Yeah.
And if you just simply want the text, that's not really what you're looking for.
As a programmer, I love the fact it returns it this way because that's why I can treat it as a list.
Yep.
Each row is returned as a list item. But to a user, they're like, what's with these square brackets? If you tried to give that to your manager as running a report, your manager would be like, oh, that's hideous. You got to fix the way that looks.
Right.
So there is a way to change the formatting. The way it works is you use a join function, and when you call the join function, you specify what character would you like to use to separate the different values. So you could show the different words or different phrases separated by commas or separated by semicolons, and then you call the join function to say, join all these different parts of a list together and use a comma to separate them or use a period to separate them. The syntax is a little funky, I will say. This is one of those ones when I first saw the syntax, I was like, what is this code doing? So the way it works is you specify the separator that you want to display, a comma, a semicolon, a colon, a slash. Then you say dot join, so the word dot join, this is a keyword, you can't change that. And then you specify the variable name that holds your list. And this doesn't have to be a list from a CSV file. This works on any list, by the way. So the way that's going to look is if I have a row, which I read from my data, then I can say print, comma, because that's a separator I want to use, and I'm including a space.
Yeah, because you have the space from comma to the next word, so yep.
I don't have to, though. And then I say dot join, and then I specify the row that I want printed that way.
Yeah.
So the way that looks is, if I can get this syntax right on the first time. This is always fun. If I do that, if I say print, let's say use a comma, dot join current row. And that should print it out. Oops, would help if I wasn't still running the code. And now you can see that I don't get those square brackets appearing around it, and it's just a nicer, more user-friendly format.
Yep.
And just to be clear, this is not specifying how the fields are separated. This is how I want them displayed. If I change that to a semicolon, it now displays it using semicolon to display it when it's displayed back to me.
Yep.
So a little weird in terms of syntax. Again, we don't all memorize these things. You look it up when you need it.
Yep.
Don't stress over it. All right. So, given all that, I think it's time for a new challenge.
Okay, let's see what we got.
All right, so the challenge is to write a program that will print the names and ages of all the guests in the guest list file you have created in the last module if you completed the last challenge. If you did not get a chance to complete the last challenge and you want to jump straight to this one, what you can always do is just do what I did. Go into Notepad, create a file kind of like the one I have below that contains names and ages separated by commas, one row per line, or one name and age per line, and then try reading that. But just make sure you don't end up with a .txt file like I did. Make sure you can see the file extensions.
Can we bring that slide back up again? If that's names and ages, why do you have me listed as 80? You know what? If I gotta say,
I got older
80,
too.
I look pretty darn good for 80. I mean, yeah.
Well, that's an octal.
An octal. Ah, I see what you did there.
Or
well done.
Or hexadecimal.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that takes us to the end of another module. Congratulations. You guys now have the ability, you think about how far you've come. You can now write code that can create files, read from files, process that information,
Yep.
we're really moving along.
Absolutely. Now, the next thing that we need to focus our attention on is this, is that we've seen a lot of the raw pieces on how to put together a program, on how to put together an application. But one of the problems that we're going to wind up running into with all those individual raw pieces is that if we're trying to keep doing something similar over and over and over again, we're going to wind up with 8 lines of code, 8 lines of code, 8 lines of code, 8 lines of code that are always the exact same thing. It'd be nice if we could just ball that up, put a name on it, and then just call it. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would make it nice, a much tidier way to write our code.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm lazy. I don't want to rewrite the code several times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you say we take 10 minutes, we'll come on back, and then we'll take a look at how to do exactly that. So we'll see you guys in 10.
See you soon. All right, wave.
Hi.
All right, hi everybody.
Hi.
Yay. Awesome.
Oh,
What?
hey.
So we're on. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I was having
yeah.
too much fun. I wanted to suit you. So I'll just tweet that. You talk. I'll
Oh, okay,
tweet.
all right, yeah. I just say, yeah,
Okay.
you talk. All right. Well, over there, tweeting away our little picture, and you can
Hi.
check it out there momentarily at
Hockey Geek Girl.
Hockey Geek Girl.
And Geek Trainer.
And Geek Trainer here is Susan Aback. I am Christopher Harrison, and this is Introduction to Programming using Python. And I guess I'll just take it from here.
Sorry, are you talking? Yeah, sorry.
No.
Go. Okay, go.
Up until now, what we've been doing has been focusing in on the little components that you're going to use to make your program. And in fact, we actually saw in the little chat window, somebody mentioned that they felt a lot more confident about going in and solving simple problems, which is awesome. That not only does that make our day, but that really was the whole goal here. Now what we want to do is kind of take what we've done and take it to that next level to kind of show one more component that you're going to need to start to write more complex code. And what we're going to need in order to start writing more complex code is simplify the basics. So rather than always having to say open every single time that I want to open up a file, let's go ahead and just create a function that will automatically take the name and give me back all the text inside of it. And so I've sort of given everything away by introducing the name function here, but let's start talking about what a function is going to do for you. Repetition. One of the problems that you're going to notice with code is that you're having to do the same thing over and over and over again. The same few lines of code, the same operations, again and again and again. One of the problems with code that you're going to notice is that you're frequently doing the exact same thing over and over and over again.
I'm not sure I got that, Christopher.
The same few lines of code, the same tasks, the same operations. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the problems that you're going to notice, in case you haven't picked up on it, what we're looking to do is avoid that repetition. Just like, nobody likes listening to somebody who's being repetition, nobody likes to see code that looks like that. That code with repetition is just fraught with problems. That not only is it now that I have to keep going back in and copy, paste, but one of the points that Susan made earlier very well is if you have to change a value somewhere, you then have to run around to all of those different spots and keep changing it over and over and over again. And while certainly, yes, variables can help you out there, it's nice to have a black box. It's nice to have some balled up block of code that I can just toss in a couple of parameters and then just poof, it gives me something back. Basically think of it as a bread machine, if you will. That I've got my bread machine, what's it going to do? Well, it's going to bake bread. Well, what I can do is I can throw in rye and all of that, and now I get rye bread, or I could throw in cinnamon and raisins and all the ingredients, and now I get back cinnamon raisin. But all I'm doing is I'm just simply tossing a few ingredients into a machine, I wait for a few hours, and then voila, I have bread. That's what a function is all about. It's your bread machine. That what I'm going to have is some little box that I can toss a few items into, and it will automatically do work for me, so that way I'm not having to do the nitty-gritty. I'm not having to knead dough. I'm not having to punch it down, although that can be a great stress reliever. But I'm not having to do that. I'm just letting the machine do it for me. That's exactly what a function is. So what if we could just create a button that does the work and then just press that button.
And it's nice and sort of self-contained, right?
That's it.
I like it.
Yep, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So let's talk about functions. Now, what is a function? I think the simplest way to put together a function is sort of define it in English. It's a noun. It's a reusable section of code that has a name that does something. And the